Yo, what up everyone? We are back. How you been? I'm sorry that I was kind of building up the suspense for this video. I know it was meant to come out a bit earlier today, but I was on my way back from Manchester and just trains were crazy. Anyway, Civil War Part 1. I know it's kind of like Part 1.5 for us. Yeah, you know how it is, man. We're going to get straight into it anyway. This is where we left off last time. I pretty much remember everything that we went through on the Civil War, so it'd be good just to get back into it because I have been thinking about it. So let's get into it now.
Confederates that fired the first shot. As they seceded, the Confederate States began seizing federal U.S. property throughout the South. Off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, was one such federal property, Fort Sumter, held by a measly, undersupplied U.S. force. The Confederate militia there demanded the fort surrender, a request which was quickly denied, and any remaining hope for a peaceful solution to the secession crisis probably then died when the Confederates did this. The Battle of Fort Sumter is
I feel like out of the two sides, the Confederates are kind of the ones that just didn't give a fuck. Like, they give a fuck, but it was like, you know, they ain't got time to be sitting around waiting. Especially when they're kind of like the underdog in the fight, if you look at the two sides, like how many states they have. But yeah, they were definitely the aggressors, I feel.
Considered to be the beginning of the American Civil War. Many of the Confederates there also considered it to be the end of the American Civil War. They hoped Old Abe would just sigh and say, okay, you win. Unfortunately for them, Lincoln actually said, you're about to get a roundhouse to the face. Lincoln sent out the call for 75,000 volunteers and men.
Sorry, that just kind of reminds me of Lord of the Rings. Lincoln trying to wake up Rohan.
Get a roundhouse to the face. Lincoln sent out the call for 75,000 volunteers, and men signed up in droves, hopeful for some adventure and good old-fashioned F-U-N in the new Confederate capital at Richmond, Virginia.
Hey, imagine trying to get today's generation to sign up to go to war. Just wouldn't happen, man. People were lying about their age and everything back then. You couldn't pay someone enough to go to war now.
Confederate President Jefferson Davis and his cheekbones had also sent out the call for 100,000 men. As ever, both sides hoped for a quick end to the war. Is it over yet? No, Jimmy, it's been 1 week. Is it over now? No. How about now? If you ask that one more time, I swear I will turn this army around and you'll all have to go back home to your wives and children. But in particular, the South knew the conflict would pose a bit of a challenge. How can we expect to win with a population of only 5 million against 22 million in the North? If you count us 4 million slaves, you'd have 9 million. Great idea. Hand these rifles out to hold them. Wait a minute. You almost had me there. The problem for Lincoln was that many of his top generals were getting old and were being a bit too cautious. The commanding general was a man named Winfield Scott, a veteran of the Mexican-American War, and by now, he was too fat to even mount a horse. Okay, chaps, we need to come up with a plan. Hit me. We could wait for the Confederates to come and apologize. Maybe we should all sit in a circle and discuss our feelings. Crossing the Delaware into New Jersey worked for me. Those are all terrible ideas. And you?
You think that the North would maybe have come up with an idea that maybe a swift counter-attack and like a show of force. Well, this is kind of always the hindsight after a war's already finished. It always was, you know, what can we do now? You know, like at the start of World War II. I'm just using that as a reference because I don't really know enough about the Civil War to comment. But like the idea was that when Hitler invaded the Sudetenland, a show of force by France and England would have maybe persuaded him to, you know, maybe at least hold up for the time being and not start the war right now. But he just carried on straight through into Poland and called our bluff. And that's how he went to war. But I don't know, maybe things would have been a bit different if the North showed a strong resistance earlier. I mean, maybe they will, we don't know yet. Well, I don't.
Wrong video. Hey, I'm the greatest president in the history of this nation. Yeah, we'll see about that, dingus. Eventually, Lincoln's generals came up with a multi-pronged strategy. First, a blockade would cut off and starve the South of supplies by sea. Secondly, taking control of the Great Mississippi River would sever the South's economic artery while splitting it in two. And finally, a main Union force in the East would move south and take the Confederate capital, ending the war. Bada boom, bada bing. Skirmishes began to break out across the nation, and the Union Army in the East began to move south towards Richmond. Everything seemed to be going well until they reached Manassas, where they came upon a large Confederate force. It's almost like they were waiting for us. How did they know? As it turned out, spies in D.C. had sent a coded message to the Confederates warning of the invasion. Did you use NordVPN? What the heck is NordVPN?
No.
I'm so glad you asked. Do you use the internet?
Don't
Me
worry,
too.
guys, I got
Do
it.
you like internet safety? On YouTube, that's OverSimplified, and plus an as support by a rail, and the two sides were about equal in numbers. However, they were also equally inexperienced. A large number of civilians also rode out by carriage from DC to picnic on the nearby hills and watch the excitement unfold. Nobody seemed to quite understand how destructive this war was going to be. The Union forces pulled a flanking maneuver to hit the Confederates on their left, and the two sides fired on each other in rows. Farm families living in the area were forced to flee the fighting, including a man named Wilmer McLean. Hurry up!
Yeah, war was brutal back then, man. I mean, war only has got more brutal since, but imagine, where is that little picture? Imagine just being like, yeah, so basically you're going to stand here on this front line, and you're going to shoot at them, and they're going to shoot at you. And, you know, if you live, then you can reload and fire again, and we're just going to keep going until one of us runs out. I know there was a bit more to it than that, but you see these guys here, like, say they shot, and these guys were kind of step forward and shoot. You were still just crossing your fingers after every shot and hoping that you killed them first. I mean, there weren't much other option at the time due to the technology, but you can imagine how flipping scared you'd be.
Nobody seemed to quite understand how their left, and the two sides fired on each other in rows. Farm families living in the area were forced to flee the fighting, including a man named Wilmer McLean. Hurry up, Martha! There's a war out here! The more you tell me to hurry up, the slower I will go! The Union force saw initial success pushing the Confederates back to Henry Hill, but one as of yet fairly unknown General Thomas Jackson had arrived, and he took a defensive position, standing firm like a stone wall, holding the Union Army off, and finally sending them running back to Washington, D.C., with heavy casualties.
480 killed to their 390, 1,000 wounded to 1,600. 1,200 soldiers missing. I mean, when you say missing, do you mean that they were dead and never confirmed, or they went AWOL? Jesus. I mean, the wounded is the biggest problem. I know deaths are a big problem, but wounded require resources and more food and, you know, expensive things like, you know, medicine. So, you know, wounded will cost you a lot of money. I know that's obvious, but just reinstating it.
The sobering reality of war hit both sides hard, and the North, having just lost the first major battle, had to face the serious prospect that they may not actually win this war. President Lincoln, General Jackson whipped us so hard, the Confederates are calling him Stonewall Jackson. Wait, that's why they're calling him that? Not because he looks like he ran face first into a stone wall? Apparently not. Worse yet, the North had also lost the first major battle out west, giving away control of southwest Missouri. All of this was terrible news for Abraham Lincoln, especially since many of his generals and cabinet already didn't have much respect for him. They felt he was incapable of running a war, because he seemed a bit like your friendly old grandpa. He famously loved a long-winded story and a good pun. I've been so busy, my wife is missing me, but her aim is starting to improve. But deep down, few realized he could also be incredibly shrewd. Oh, Abe, you're so funny. Funny how? Funny like I'm a clown?
Name the film. This isn't the first reference to this film we've had on this channel. Name the film.
Abe, you're so funny. Funny how? Funny like I'm a clown?
Like I amuse you?
No. Funny how? Like I'm here to amuse you? During the war, Lincoln committed acts that were viewed by some as impeachable. His administration suppressed the free media from printing articles sympathetic towards the South. Some Southern sympathizers were even arrested without a trial. Lincoln's criticizers began accusing him of being a tyrant. But to quote the man himself, hey, it's war, baby. What are you gonna do? By the end of 1861, with things already looking bad for the North, abolitionists such as Frederick Douglass couldn't believe that the Union Army weren't enlisting black men. He continued to put pressure on Lincoln to make the war about emancipation. Mr. President, it's time to make the war about emancipation. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. The feathers are already ruffled. But Lincoln, hanging on to hope for a quick end to the conflict, continued to fight.
So there seems to be like mixed opinions on whether... I know during the course of this, he's said that Lincoln wasn't for the slaves, and he hoped that over time that problem would kind of solve itself if he helped just kind of push the motions towards it. But then there's been a few people in the comments saying that he genuinely just did not care about slavery, and that wasn't really the big problem about the war because they were profiting. The North were profiting from the cotton that the South was selling. No. The North were purchasing the cotton that the South was selling, made by slaves. So where do you guys stand on this? Because there seems to be very mixed opinions on what Abraham Lincoln actually thought about the slaves. And whenever I hear that, like, oh, when the slaves were freed, it was Abraham Lincoln. was that motivation, a moral one? Was it an economic one? Was it just to boost him in the polls? I don't know. You tell me.
Only for the preservation of the Union. It was decided, however, that escaped slaves from the Confederacy could be held as enemy contraband, and many of these men were put to work bolstering the Union's infrastructure and supply lines. Hoping to get things moving, Lincoln made young General George McClellan the new commanding general, and McClellan began to train up his men. He thought a lot of himself, however, and believed he was going to be the nation's great savior. And like many others, he didn't approve of the president's handling of the war. On one occasion, Lincoln went to McClellan's house to meet with him, but McClellan was late returning home. He kept the president waiting, and when he finally got there, he just straight up went to bed. Now that's what I call disrespectful. McClellan talked the talk, but could he walk the walk?
Way.
No. Like Lincoln's other generals, McClellan was maddeningly cautious. Hey man, could you move south and attack the enemy? What? Are you crazy? What if they have a big scary army down there? They probably do. What? Oh my gosh! McClellan worried that he did not have the numbers he needed to fight effectively. What if they have like 10,000 men? Okay, no problem. We'll get you 20,000 men. Well, what if they have 30,000 men? I'll need 40. Okay, you can have 40. Well, what if they have 50? I'll need 60. Lincoln tried, but it was all in vain. McClellan would not make a move for the rest of the year. The North's one saving grace for now was a general out west fighting in Kentucky and Tennessee, General Ulysses S. Grant. Cool, collected, methodical, and a big fan of whiskey. His chief of staff took it upon himself to keep Grant sober. One officer said that Grant habitually wore an expression as though he were determined to drive his head through a brick wall and was about to do it. And that determination led him to score a number of key victories when others around him were failing. At the Battle of Fort Donelson, Grant was like, "Why does Stonewall Jackson get a cool nickname and I don't? I want a cool nickname." "Sir, the Confederates say they're ready to surrender and want to know your terms." "No terms, just unconditional surrender." Hey, unconditional surrender Grant. That's a pretty cool nickname, right? Guys? Right?
What?
Later in April 1862, the Confederates launched...
Don't tell me that became his actual nickname. You've got to be joking. Unconditional surrender Grant. Man, that must be a bitch to type out in ink.
Launched a sudden attack on Grant's army at Shiloh, but the determined, unconditional surrender Grant threw his lines at the rebels and sent them running. The battle resulted in the heaviest casualties in U.S.
2,800 killed. Jesus Christ, there's some... 2 seconds, guys. As if kids have the nerve to play. What the fuck? Yeah, the North took some heavy losses there, Jesus Christ. And look at the captured. Fucking hell.
History so far sent them running. The battle resulted in the heaviest casualties in U.S. history so far. And despite his victory, Grant found himself under fire. You have to get rid of Grant. Why? Didn't he win? Yes, but he just threw his men at the enemy. Isn't that the point? Also, he's a loony drunk. Well, what does he like to drink? I believe whiskey, sir. Then send him more. Lincoln watched as his cabinet did nothing but bicker, and his generals did nothing. But then, worst of all, personal tragedy struck. Lincoln's young son, Willie, very much loved by the president, died of typhoid fever at the age of 11.
Shit.
Lincoln was a sensitive man and was heavily affected by the loss. His wife was inconsolable. But one of Lincoln's greatest traits, what made him such a great leader, was in the darkest of times, with composure and determination, he kept moving forward. He knew it was his responsibility to hold himself and his family together, and by doing so, he hoped to hold the nation together. And he had had it with McClellan's inaction. Lincoln decided he was gonna take control. In March 1862, Lincoln firmly ordered McClellan to once again move south towards Richmond. McClellan insisted instead they move by sea to the Virginia Peninsula and attack Richmond from the southeast. "Yes," said Lincoln. "Okay, anything." Lincoln held on to some of McClellan's men to defend D.C. from a nearby Stonewall Jackson wreaking havoc in the Shenandoah Valley, and he sent McClellan south.
Was Jackson just up there just smashing shit by himself then? I know we're not supposed to like the South because they're the slave, they're widely considered the bad guys, I guess. But you gotta admit, Stonewall Jackson was fucking smashing it, weren't he?
A nearby Stonewall Jackson wreaking havoc in the Shenandoah Valley, and he sent McClellan south. McClellan landed on the peninsula, and he began to move inland. He came up against a small Confederate army that had dug in at Yorktown. McClellan vastly outnumbered the force, but it's said that Confederate General McClellan dug in at Yorktown. McClellan vastly outnumbered the...
Jesus. Okay, right. I just needed to see the numbers.
The force, but it's said that Confederate General Magruder deceived McClellan by cleverly maneuvering his smaller force and making McClellan believe he faced a huge army. No, you have way more men than them. Move forward. No. McClellan settled in for a month-long siege, giving time for Johnston to move south from Manassas and Magruder time to retreat. When he finally entered the city and found it deserted, he declared it a victory, calling his success brilliant. Then, after meeting some resistance at Williamsburg, McClellan moved to within just 20 miles of Richmond, his armies able to hear the church bells ringing in the enemy capital. You still outnumber them. Go give him hell. No. McClellan once again held back, moving slowly and defensively, and with his army split in two, the Confederates saw an opportunity to strike back. McClellan's advance was halted, and now the Confederates pulled an ace out of their sleeve. General Lee, you're up. Do you think we should evacuate Richmond? No, Mr. President, no need. General Robert E. Lee, one of the most brilliant military commanders of the time, was now in charge. One of his biggest strengths was his ability to read the mind of his enemy, and he knew McClellan was cautious and weak. After moving Stonewall Jackson south to join him, and even though he had a smaller army, Lee hit McClellan in a series of fast-paced, close combat battles that had McClellan spooked. McClellan retreated the Union Army back again and again and again, escaping the peninsula and returning to D.C. Lee had defeated McClellan, and the campaign had failed. Well, that was a major success.
This dude is pissing me off bad, man. What? No one can be that shit, surely? Like, the dude done nothing for a year, then got ordered to move the army. Oh. People like this cost so many lives.
Success? Tell me exactly what was successful about that. Well, we successfully retreated. You lost. I didn't lose. I merely failed to win. Things just kept looking worse for the North. At least their navy had seen some success, capturing a number of key port cities, notably when they steamrolled past Confederate forts to take New Orleans. And speaking of the navy, both sides had begun using ironclads. So that's pretty cool. But in the east, they still weren't having any luck. After McClellan's disastrous campaign, Lincoln briefly sent out one General John Pope to attack Northern Virginia. Hey man, just checking in. How's it going? Well, the Confederates kicked my butt at Cedar Mountain. Then they raided my camp and ran off with my money and clothes. Also, I appear to have been wedgied. Lee defeated Pope.
What is it? Have you guys noticed this? Were you guys feeling this at all? That, like, let's just assume that the South are the bad guys because they support slavery. Which is bad, in case you didn't know. The bad guys in real life and films just always seem to be to have more prowess in their attacks and like how aggressive they are initially. Now I'm assuming, and I think rightfully so, that the North kind of took some time and needed some beatings to realise, this is serious, and then kind of re-energise and then strike back at the South, inevitably winning as they did. But it's like at the start of World War II, the Nazis had the initiative. At the start of World War One, the Germans had the initiative. The aggressors always seem... you know what I'm trying to say. I know that they've had more time. Well, they didn't have more time to prepare. They kind of kicked off at the same time. I just feel like the North have terrible leaders right now. Terrible generals. And this General Lee just seems like an absolute badass. And Jackson.
At yet another battle at Bull Run, in which nearby farm families once again got caught up in the fighting. Hurry up, Martha! There's another war out here! I'm waiting for my hair to dry! Wilmer McLean, sick of war, moved his family south, where he knew the war would definitely, absolutely, never touch him again. But Lincoln had yet another problem to contend with. European powers, in particular the UK, were looking increasingly like they may intervene diplomatically on the side of the Confederates. They were missing their precious supply of southern cotton because of the Union blockade, and they wanted to see a swift conclusion to the war. The tension between America and Great Britain had been increasing, especially after Confederate diplomats were discovered on a British ship. Now, after McClellan's failure to take Richmond, the UK declared it impossible for the
upload a video every month. To be fair, I can imagine how much these oversimplified videos cost for him to make. The North to win. Yeah. I mean, this is kind of a selfish approach to the war. They're the UK and Europe just after the profits, obviously.
the North to win. Lincoln needed something to prevent Europe from getting involved, and after more petitioning from abolitionists, he decided maybe the time was finally right to make the war about ending the institution he hated, slavery. If the North had a noble cause to fight for, Europe would be less likely to intervene. But Lincoln and his cabinet knew before they could declare something as radical as emancipation, they needed a victory, especially now that the Confederates were about to go on the attack. Aware that he had a limited number of men and supplies, Lee now hoped that if he could just threaten Washington, D.C. militarily, he would gain Europe's recognition and crush Northern morale in time for the midterm elections, forcing the North to negotiate. With confidence at an all-time high, for the first time, Robert E. Lee invaded the North. But on September 13th, the North finally had some luck. Oh boy, it's my lucky day! A cigar in a field. Hey, what's this wrapped around it? Oh my gosh! That's right, the North had discovered General Lee's battle plans wrapped around some cigars. And in them, they saw that Lee had split up.
What are the fucking chances of that? Are you being serious? He leaves his war plans around cigars and then forgets or leaves or loses the cigars. Ugh. This guy was looking pretty awesome until now.
His forces. McClellan headed out from D.C., and the two sides met in the Battle of Antietam, a crucial battle that would decide the course of the war. It saw the most vicious fighting to date, and still remains the single bloodiest day in American.
Jesus. Well, for a start, I can't believe that 9/11's above D-Day. I would have thought for sure D-Day would have been the bloodiest day in American history. The Battle of Antietam? I'm going to be perfectly honest, I've never heard of it. And you're probably screaming at your screens right now, but I've just never heard of it.
In history. But, for once, the North came out victorious, and Lee was forced to retreat. He's on the run. Chase him down and finish him off. No. You know what, old buddy, old pal?
You're fired.
You're fired.
Yes!
The North had won their crucial victory. Lincoln breathed a huge sigh of relief, and with that win, he was prepared to take a huge step. On September 22nd, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. In January, all slaves held in the Confederate States would be, as far as the U.S. government was concerned, officially free throughout the North.
So that kind of answers my question to the motivation of why Abraham freed the slaves. It was essentially so Europe wouldn't join the Civil War. I'm sure, well, he hated the institution anyway, we've covered that. Maybe it was the European pressure which forced it at this time period. Maybe if he was left to his own devices, it would have happened later on anyway. We don't know. But this is an overwhelmingly good result anyway.
Free black men and women rejoiced, knowing that if the North were to win, their brothers and sisters would no longer be held in bondage. The proclamation also had the intended effect on Europe, who were not willing to oppose a pledge to end slavery. An outraged Confederacy knew that Lincoln had given the war a new meaning. It was no longer just about the preservation of the Union. Now, it was about creating a new Union, washed clean of its original sin. A Union without slavery.
Man, that was a good video. As they all are. I genuinely look forward to recording these videos now. Especially if it's on stuff that I'm not overly sure about, like the Civil War. I was okay on the Revolution, for the most part. Civil War, not a clue. Battle of Antietam, I had no idea. I wish it would have went into a bit more detail. Maybe we can do a separate video on that, but I can't believe that 9/11 was above D-Day in America's bloodiest days. I'm not sure of the statistics, but I know. I don't even want to say them in case like very disrespectful and just being way off on the numbers. But I really hope you enjoyed I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know I did. I just want to thank you all as well for the support that I'm getting, man. The likes, the comments, the subscribers, the views. You have no idea how much it means when it means the most. The Civil War Part 2 I'll do tomorrow, and I'll release it in full, the whole video, because I'll get away with that, no problem. Shout out to OverSimplified, and I really appreciate you joining me. I honestly do. Go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff, man. And I'll catch you tomorrow for the new one. Probably, what time will it be? We're 8 hours ahead. Probably be out around 1 o'clock for you guys, maybe. Nah, be out about 11 o'clock for you guys. But yeah, man, peace out, take it easy, and thanks for joining me.